Hey everybody, today we're going to paint this really cute and simple fall bookmark. We're using just a few different colors and a really cool marker that I'm going to show you how to use so that we can make these neat little bleeding tree trunks. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to tape our paper down onto something that we can move. Whenever I'm painting something that is small, like a bookmark, I always like to use these little mini clipboards because then I can move it and shift it around. The other thing that I'm going to be using today is really just one big brush. This is a number 2 Da Vinci, but you could use really any size brush that you like for this project. And then the magic marker over here that I'm using is not a magic marker. It is a Tombow black water-based marker. And this is the magic that I'm going to show you in a little bit. And that's what creates these really cool bleeding tree trunks. So we are going to be using that today. I've added a link in my description as well for that, or you can just look it up. Once we have taped everything down, the first thing that I like to do is make a mark. I'll leave this right here so you can see it. I like to make a mark where the land meets the sky. If you've done any of my landscape paintings before in the past, you'll always see me drawing on the tape rather than the paper, just because then I don't have to worry about seeing those pencil lines. So I've made my mark of generally where I'm going to put that. And then the first thing that I'm going to do, it's hard to see, but I'm going to paint these really faint trees in the background. And I'm going to be using a little bit of my Indian red watered down. So let's just grab a little bit of water. I always like to add water to my tray first. And I'm going to grab some of that Indian red. Maybe I'm going to add a little bit of raw sienna. You can decide what kind of colors you want in the background. You're just making sure that this is really watery. And we're going to paint our first tree layer. If it's helpful, you can paint the trunk first and then paint the top of the tree. I'm just going to do 2, but you can do, I would, maybe you could do even 3, whatever fits in that space. And then make the tree trunk go right down to that line that we created. And I'm going to make just one more over on this side, maybe slightly shorter, or if you started out with a short one, then make one that's slightly taller, just so that you have a little bit of variety. There we go. And then I'm going to create the ground. So I'm just going to paint a line where it connects and drag that out. We're basically done with our first layer. This is so simple and I just love it. You can do it over and over and over again. Once that layer is painted, we're going to let that dry before we do our next layer. For the next step, you're going to want to use a Tombow water-based black pen. And what we're going to use this for are the trunks. So I'm going to draw my trunks with this marker, and I'm going to use the smaller end of it so that I have a really fine point. So on this one, there's 2 different ends. One is more of a brush tip, and then this is just a regular fine point. And what we're going to do is I'm going to do about, just like I did here, about 4 trunks, and they're very thin at the top. It looks just like an elongated triangle. And the most important part of this whole entire thing is that this has to be dry. We're not going to draw with our Tombow pen on a wet surface, because the cool part of why we're using this is that it bleeds. But if you're drawing on a wet surface, it's going to go all over the place. So make sure that this is dry before you actually draw the trunks. Now I'm going to make a little variety, and you can see here in my example, some are a little bit lower, so it looks like they're closer to us. I'm just going to mimic what I did before. Let's do that. So basically draw a line that just fans out slightly at the base. Let's do another one right here. Let's make this one kind of even closer. And you're drawing all of your tree trunks. There we go. And one more big one. And I'm going to fan that out just so you can see that shape. So like I said, it's a really elongated triangle. And then I'm going to just fill that in. Now for the fun part. You can do this in lots of different orders, but for me, I just kind of randomly plopped in those trees. But the important part is making sure that as you layer up, the last tree is basically dry before you do the next tree. So I'm going to grab my paintbrush, the same one I used the first time around, and I'm going to start out with a little bit of that Indian red. It's a very warm color. It's perfect for fall. And this time you're going to want to make sure that it is a little bit more concentrated than what we did for the background. And the trick to this, so when we use our Tombow pen, remember this is a water-based marker and it is not permanent, so it will bleed, which is why we like it. But we need to make sure that we're not going to touch that trunk, the top of that trunk, until we're almost done with the entire shape. So that is the trick to this whole thing. So I'm going to start, I always like to start a tree by 1, 2, 3, and then I'm just going to kind of do a few little tree tops, and then I'm pressing harder to create some more blobby parts of that tree, and I'm going to go around that trunk. Remember, I'm going to avoid it until I basically like the way that my tree looks. And then right at the end, I'm going to go right over that. And you can see, and I can even make a few little bits at the bottom here. That's kind of nice that it bleeds into it. It's this perfect amount of bleeding into your watercolor. We're going to leave that and let it dry up at the top. Now, don't wash your brush out yet because we're going to do the base. So before you wash that out, you're going to go 1, 2, and just kind of touch the base of that. Then wash your brush out really well. Dab off any excess water and just kind of barely touch the bottom of that so you can fan more of that out, more of that color out. And what I did here is I just kind of randomly placed that so it looks like a very colorful, fall forest floor. Now we're done with that tree and we're going to repeat that for each one of the other trees. Let this one dry before you move on to the one that's right next door. If you're like me and you're kind of impatient, you can skip to one of these two. So I'm going to do that with this one over here. That is mostly raw sienna. If it is not bright enough for you, then you could add a little bit of lemon yellow. If it's too bright, you can drag in a little bit of burnt sienna to make it a little bit more orange. But those colors are the ones that you're going to want to use. And so now I'm going to do the exact same thing that I did with my first tree. Start at the top. And remember, this one's going to cut, it's a little bit cut off. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, and then I'm going to build that shape. I'm not worried about my tree behind it. I'm just covering that up because the idea is that we're kind of filling this space. Okay, here's the fun part. Now we're going to paint right on top of that tree trunk. You can kind of dab some of that extra around it so it looks really full and dark. I'm going to use up some of that. All right, look at that. So cute. Oh, and I forgot, again, just like we did the other tree trunk, before we wash our brushes out, I'm going to grab some more paint here. But before you wash your brush out, you're going to do the same thing at the base that we did with the first tree. You're going to use some of that extra and leave it at the bottom and kind of drag it out. And then I'm going to put this just kind of randomly like I did before. Okay. And I'm washing my brush out now. And now I'm going to move on to this little green tree. These two trees are still pretty wet. This one's really far over and it's not going to touch anything. So I'm going to do that one. If you're wondering what colors I used a little bit, I actually just mixed my Hooker's green into my dirty tray. Now, this is why I don't really wash my colors out or my tray out, because sometimes you just want a really muddy color for something realistic. So I'm taking a little Hooker's green and mixing it into that dirty part of my tray, which had a little bit of my Indian red, a little bit of this burnt sienna, and it's going to create a very perfect fall green where it looks like, the tree is just starting to change color. Okay. Now, same deal. This one's a little shorter, maybe just a faint little top. And I'm just going to blob. Oh, that's not enough paint. There we go. We want it concentrated. There. And I'm going to just dab that in. I'm gonna add a little bit at the bottom, make sure that I just touch that trunk. Oops, if you do that, you can just make it wider. There we go. And remember, before you wash that brush out, mine's got a streak of that burnt sienna. Remember that before you wash your brush out, you're gonna take that color, you're gonna touch the bottom of the trunk and kind of drag it out. That's gonna make it look like it's really kind of connected to the forest floor. There we go, nice. Wash that brush out before you do your final one, and I'm gonna wait for this to be totally dry before I paint that. All right, this is basically dry. So now we're gonna mix up that final color, which is kind of a brown color, but it's mostly burnt sienna with a little bit of our Indian red, tiny bit of Payne's gray just to deepen that. You could also try just adding a little bit of your Hooker's green to kind of darken it up or dull it down without adding a new color to your color palette. So I'm gonna do the same thing I did before. I'm going to make my 1, 2, 3 at the top and then slowly just add more paint. The other thing that you need to be careful of is you don't want to overwork the area that's underneath that first layer. And now I'm gonna drag it down, get pretty close to that trunk. I'm gonna first just kind of change up my edge, and then I'm gonna paint directly on that trunk so it kind of bleeds and blends together. And then I'm gonna take that leftover bit, remember, and I'm gonna add it to the base of my tree and then just kind of use some of this up, just randomly. You could even make little falling leaves if you wanted to. Maybe we should try that. There. That's so stinking cute. Okay, and if you wanted to, you could, you know, do a little splatter effect. There's so many different things you could do. That is basically it. We have created this beautiful fall bookmark. When you're done, you can remove the tape. And I like to create, sometimes if I don't clip them already, I like to clip my pages so it has a nice rounded edge. Just make sure that when you remove your tape, anytime you're doing something, really wait for it to dry. I'm being a tiny bit impatient, so my paper might tear. So if it's tearing, that means that your paper, even though it looks dry, it's not completely dry yet. Look at how cute this is. I just love this. I hope you had a ton of fun with this, and I will see you next time. Thanks so much. Bye.